determine what I do not know in a given problem and determine what my variable should represent. And I can write and solve two-step equations. These are the two things that by the end of the lesson we're hoping that we'll be able to do. And maybe not directly after we finish watching the video, but at least after we practice tomorrow in class. Okay? So keep this part in mind. I can determine what I do not know in a given problem and determine what the variable should represent. That is the toughest part about today's lesson. So let's start simple. Let's start very simple. Translate each sentence into an equation. We already talked about solving two-step equations. Today we're going to talk about writing them, actually creating them. Sometimes that can be somewhat difficult, but once you get it on paper, usually it's not too difficult to solve. So here we are, number 1. It says twice a number increased by 5 equals negative 25. Well, before we even start, I kind of gave you a 3-step help corner down here, something to look at. 3 steps that you should consider when you're reading a given problem and you're wondering, how in the world do I solve that? Okay, the first one is, what are we trying to find? Or what do we not know? In number 1, it says twice a number. It doesn't tell us what number, it just says a number. And since we don't know that number, guess what number 2 says? That thing that we don't know that we're trying to find, that becomes our variable. So as I've already written here, I just chose n. You can choose any variable you want. I defined what my variable represents. I said my variable n represents or equals a number, because in this situation, that's what I don't know. I don't know what number we're talking about. So n is a number. Okay? Step 3 here says, after we figure out what our variable represents, everything else is based on our variable. So let's look for keywords. So if n represents this number that's being talked about here, our problem says twice that number. So twice our number, 2 times n, increased by 5 usually means if something's increased by 5, you add 5 to it. And that guy's going to equal, that tells us pretty easily, equals negative 25. So guess what? We just translated this, number 1, into an equation. Okay, the toughest part is determining what our variable represents. Let's see if we can do it over here, even though I kind of already gave it to you. In number 2, it says 4 times a number minus 8 equals 28. Once again, we're starting off very, very simply. So in this one, it says 4 times a number. It doesn't tell us what number. So that's what we do not know. This is my first step. I don't know what that number is, so I'm just going to say a. I'm going to let a equal that number. So 4 times a number, or 4 times my number, 4a, minus 8 equals 28. So the toughest part is figuring out what the variable represents. Then you just have to look for your keywords and create your equation based on those keywords. Alright, so number 3 is just a little more difficult. You got to take it one step further. It says when 5 is added to the product of a number and 8, the result is 69. Find the number. When 5 is added to the product of a number, once again, it doesn't tell us what number. So since we don't know what that number is, that's what we do not know, we're going to make that what our variable represents. X equals a number. Now that we figure that out, everything else is based on x. So when 5 is added to 5 plus the product of a number and 8, well, a number is x, and 8, since we're talking about a product, it must be 8 times x. The result is 69, so the sum of these two things must equal 69. Now we have our two-step equation, And we're asked to find the number. So we actually are asked to solve this. Okay? So here we are solving a two-step equation. Remember, let's get rid of everything that's not attached to our variable first. Here we go. I'm getting a little better at this writing thing. There's 8x. 69 minus 5 is 64. And we're finally left with one final step. How do you undo 8 times x? How do you undo that multiplication? You divide by 8. So here's this, and you're left with x is equal to 8. Hopefully, you all remember how to ooh, that was a terrible circle. Hopefully, you all remember how to check that. Come back to your original equation right here. Plug your 8 back in for x. 5 plus 8 times 8 is 64. So 5 plus 64 equals 69. It checks. Piece of cake. So let's move on here. Let's try and do one more of these together. Miss Parsons earns $48,400 per year. That is $4,150 more than 3 times as much as her daughter earns. How much does her daughter earn? Well, if on the last page, hopefully you wrote down our little three question prompt, what are we trying to find? Or what do we not know in this problem? We don't know how much her daughter earns. Okay, since we don't know that, that is what our variable is going to represent. So x, or whatever letter you choose, equals the amount of money her daughter earns. Once you have that figured out, it's not as difficult to create the equation. At least I don't think so. So Miss Parsons earns $48,400 per year. That means $48,400 is, usually that means equals. So I'm going to write here, 48,400 equals $4,150 more than 3 times as much as her daughter earns. Well, as much as her daughter earns is represented by x, and 3 times that x would give me 3 times as much as her daughter earns. And 3x does not quite equal $48,400. Okay? Because it says that 3 times as much as her daughter earns and an additional $4,150 would then be the same as Miss Parsons' salary. So since it's an additional $4,150, you have to add that on to 3 times as much as her daughter made. And here we go. Now we have our equation, and we can simply solve. How much does her daughter earn? So we need to solve for x. Okay? So let's get rid of everything that's not attached to the x. So let's subtract our 4150, just like that. 48.4 minus is 44,250, and that is simply equal to our 3x. And then our last step here, to undo our multiplication, we must divide on both sides, and x is going to be equal to $14,750. That is how much her daughter earns. Okay? If you want to check that, take your $14,750, bring it right back, right there. Do 3 times it, and you should come out with $44,250. And then add on to that $4,150, and you will end up with how much her mother earns. So it does check. Okay, but you should be checking all of your answers. You should never get these wrong. Alright guys, number 5 is on your own. That means you should complete it on your own. The toughest part is going to be figuring out what you don't know and making that your variable. I'll give you a tip. I'll give you a pointer for those of you who are actually listening to this and not just looking at it with no sound. How many cans did Sam collect? Since that's what we're looking for, your variable, maybe you choose x, should probably equal the number of cans Sam collected. Hopefully that gets you started. Okay, last part to sum up here. Really, it's just our 3 steps from the first slide. Okay? What are you trying to find, or what do you not yet know? Once you figure that out, you make that your variable. Your variable is going to represent what you do not know. And then it comes down to, hey, do you understand keywords? Do you know what product means? Do you know what add means? Do you know what more than means? Do you know what all those keywords mean? And if you do, writing an equation should be a cinch. Alright folks, excited to see you in class tomorrow. Have a great